The applause hit me like a wave of ice water. I stood at the back of the conference room, watching Branford gesture toward Mason like he'd just unveiled a masterpiece. "Our lead architect," Branford announced, his voice booming with pride. Every slide on the screen showed my work, my designs, my countless late nights, but my name had been erased completely. I gripped the folder in my hands so tightly the edges crumpled. Mason caught my eye from the front of the room and smirked. He knew exactly what he'd done. The board members nodded approvingly, completely unaware of the truth. My throat felt tight, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. This was the project I'd built from nothing, the system that would generate millions for the company, and now I was invisible. Branford turned toward me with a casual wave of his hand. "Meredith, take notes for us, would you?" His tone was dismissive, like I was an assistant who'd wandered into the wrong meeting. Several board members glanced at me briefly before returning their attention to Mason. I nodded once, my face carefully blank, and opened my notebook. But inside something shifted. This wasn't just unfair anymore. This was war. My hands shook as I gripped my pen, trying to steady them against the notebook. I pressed harder, willing the trembling to stop, but my body refused to cooperate. Mason continued talking, his voice smooth and confident as he explained features I'd spent 6 months developing. He spoke about user interface design like he understood the complexity behind each decision. He didn't. The board ate it up, asking questions he answered with rehearsed precision. I noticed Branford watching me from the corner of his eye, a slight smile playing at his lips. He was enjoying this. My chest burned with anger, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned that much in my 8 years at Vanguard Tech. Never let them see you break. Mason clicked to the next slide, and my breath caught. The data architecture diagram filled the screen, the one I'd redesigned 4 times until it was perfect. He described it like he'd created it himself, using technical terms he barely understood. One board member, an older woman named Patricia, leaned forward with interest. "This integration seems remarkably complex," she said. Mason nodded confidently. "It took considerable effort to develop." My pen stopped moving. That was a lie. And I had proof. Patricia asked another question, this one more technical. "How does the system handle data redundancy during peak load?" Mason hesitated for just a second, then smiled. "Through our proprietary load balancing protocol." I almost laughed. There was no load balancing protocol. The system used a completely different approach, one Mason clearly didn't understand. But the board nodded, impressed by words that meant nothing. Branford jumped in smoothly. "Mason's innovation here could revolutionize how we handle client data." My innovation. My sleepless nights. My breakthrough that came at 3 in the morning after weeks of failed attempts. I documented every step in my development logs, every decision, every iteration. Mason was claiming credit for work he couldn't even explain properly. Another board member asked about scalability. Mason fumbled slightly, then recovered with vague corporate speak about dynamic resource allocation. Wrong again. The system used fixed resource pools with predictive scaling. Anyone who actually built it would know that. Branford stood suddenly, his expression serious. "Before we continue, I need to announce an internal restructuring that affects this project." My stomach dropped. Here it comes, I thought. Whatever they'd been planning, this was it. My name is Meredith Collins. I'm 32 years old, and I've spent the last 8 years building software solutions for Vanguard Tech. I started as a junior developer fresh out of college, hungry to prove myself in an industry that often overlooked women in technical roles. I worked harder than anyone, stayed later, learned faster. Within 3 years I was leading small projects. Within 5, I was handling multimillion-dollar accounts. I loved my work. Not just the coding or the problem-solving, but the satisfaction of creating something that actually helped people. The project they were presenting today was supposed to be my crowning achievement. 16 months ago, Branford called me into his office with an opportunity. A major client needed a complete overhaul of their data management system. It was complex, high stakes, and potentially worth $20 million in contracts. "I want you to lead this," he'd said. I'd accepted immediately, already planning the architecture in my head. For over a year, I'd poured everything into that project. Late nights, weekends, skipped vacations. I built something remarkable, something that solved problems other companies said were impossible. And now, watching Branford and Mason present it as their own work, I understood something clearly. This wasn't accidental. This was planned, coordinated, deliberate, and I'd been too focused on the work to see it coming. 2 months earlier, everything seemed normal. I arrived at the office that Tuesday morning with coffee in hand and a long to-do list in my head. The project was entering its final phase, and I needed to review the testing protocols. I logged into my workstation and opened the shared drive where all project files were stored. 3 folders were missing. Not deleted, just gone from my access list. I refreshed the page, thinking it was a glitch. Nothing changed. The folders I'd created, filled with months of documentation and design specifications, had vanished from my view. I checked my permissions. Everything showed as normal. Called IT immediately. A technician named Warren answered, sounding bored. "Probably just permissions updating," he said. "Happens sometimes with large projects. Can you check when it'll be restored?" "Yes. I need those files today. Should sort itself out by end of day. If not, submit a ticket." He hung up before I could respond. I sat back uneasy. This wasn't normal. I'd never lost access to my own files before. I tried logging in from a different computer. Same result. The folders existed, I could see them in the directory tree, but I couldn't open them. 2 hours later, I walked past conference room B and stopped cold. Through the glass wall, I saw Mason sitting at the table with Branford. They were looking at something on a laptop. My laptop. From that angle, I could just make out the screen. My data models. My design documents. And I definitely wasn't invited to that meeting. I stood outside conference room B, trying to look casual while my heart pounded. The door was locked. I could see that from the indicator light. That was deliberate. Meetings in this building were never locked unless something sensitive was being discussed. Through the glass, Branford pointed at something on the screen, and Mason nodded, taking notes. They were deep in conversation, completely focused. I recognized the interface on the laptop screen. It was my development environment, showing the system architecture I'd been refining for months. Branford tapped the screen, and Mason leaned forward. They were studying my work without me present. I pulled out my phone and took a quick photo through the glass, making sure to capture the laptop screen and both their faces. Then I walked away before they noticed me. Back at my desk, my phone buzzed with an email. From Branford. Subject line: Project Documentation Request. I opened it with a sinking feeling. "Meredith, I need you to compile a clean summary of every system element, including all technical specifications, design rationale, and implementation details. Please have this completed by Friday." That gave me 3 days to essentially document everything I'd built, stripped of my personal notes and development process. Everything they'd need to understand the system without needing me to explain it. I stared at the email for a long moment. This wasn't a standard documentation request. This was them gathering everything they needed to cut me out completely. Thursday afternoon, I returned from lunch to find chaos at my desk. 2 movers were boxing up my belongings while my computer was already disconnected and sitting on a cart. My nameplate, the one that said Meredith Collins, Senior Systems Architect, was gone from the wall. In its place, workers were installing a new one. Mason's name gleamed on the polished metal. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice sharper than intended. One mover shrugged. "Office reassignment. We got the order this morning." "Reassignment to where?" "Cubicle 47. Down by the elevators." Cubicle. After 8 years and multiple promotions, they were moving me to a cubicle in the least desirable section of the floor. I watched them load the last box onto the cart, then headed straight to human resources. The HR manager, a woman named Valerie, barely looked up when I entered. I need to know why I'm being moved out of my office. It's temporary, Valerie said, her tone suggesting the conversation was already over. We're reconfiguring team assignments. And Mason gets my office because he's taking on expanded responsibilities with the current project. My project. The one I built. For how long? That hasn't been determined yet. Her eyes finally met mine and I saw something there. Not sympathy exactly, but acknowledgement. She knew this was wrong, but she wasn't going to help me. I left her office and went to cubicle 47. It was half the size of my previous space, with no window and barely enough room for my equipment. But I set up quietly, and I started planning. That weekend I did something I'd never done before. I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking strategically. I created a private folder on my personal laptop, completely separate from the company network. Inside I built a timeline. Every suspicious event, every missing file, every strange meeting. I included dates, times, names of people involved. I went through my email archives and saved every message related to the project. Not just recent ones, but everything from the beginning. Branford's original assignment email. My weekly progress reports. Technical discussions with the development team. Everything that proved this was my project from day one. I organized them by date and topic, creating an evidence trail that was undeniable. Then I did something that felt paranoid but turned out to be crucial. I checked the access logs for all my project files. Vanguard Tech System tracked every time someone opened, copied, or modified a file. The logs told a disturbing story. Multiple files had been accessed by Mason's credentials, often late at night or early morning. But one entry stood out. A critical system file had been copied at 2:14 in the morning last Tuesday. Mason's username was attached to the action. I knew for a fact that Mason never worked past 6 p.m. He bragged about his work-life balance constantly. So either he'd suddenly developed insomnia and a passion for overnight coding, or someone else was using his account. Either way, it was unauthorized access. I documented everything, took screenshots, and saved them in 3 separate locations. If they were building a case to push me out, I was building one too. Monday morning I did something that would change everything. I filed an official copyright registration for the system framework and user interface design. It was completely legal. While Vanguard Tech owned the final product, I developed the core architecture on my own time, using my personal equipment, before ever pitching it to Branford. I had emails proving the original concept was mine, developed independently. The registration process was straightforward but thorough. I submitted all my early design documents, the ones with timestamps from before Vanguard was ever involved. I included my personal development notes, sketches, even the notebook where I'd first mapped out the system architecture during a weekend at home. It took hours to compile everything, but when I hit submit, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about protecting my work anymore. This was about establishing undeniable proof of ownership. The confirmation email arrived that evening. My framework was officially registered under my name. Nobody at Vanguard knew about it yet. That was intentional. Tuesday morning, I arrived at my cubicle to find a calendar alert. Branford had cancelled all my meetings for the next 2 weeks. Not rescheduled. Cancelled. Every project check-in, every stakeholder review, every team discussion, gone from my calendar. When I tried to add them back, I got an error message. You do not have permission to modify this calendar event. They'd locked me out of my own schedule. By Wednesday, the erasure was nearly complete. A junior analyst named Trevor started appearing in meetings I'd normally attend. He was fresh out of college, eager but inexperienced. I watched him carry my project folders into conference room A, where the senior team was gathered. When I tried to follow, Branford's assistant stopped me. This meeting is for project leads only. I am the project lead, I said. She gave me an apologetic smile that wasn't apologetic at all. Not according to the updated roster. I checked the roster. Mason was listed as lead architect. Trevor was listed as systems integration specialist. My name appeared once, at the bottom. Technical consultant. A demotion in everything but official paperwork. Over the next few days, people started sending Trevor questions meant for me. Detailed technical questions about system functionality, implementation decisions, bug fixes. He'd forward them to Mason, who would then forward them to me with a brief note like, "Handle this," or "Respond to Trevor." I was doing all the work while Trevor and Mason got all the credit. Friday afternoon, Trevor stopped by my cubicle, looking uncomfortable. "Hey Meredith, I just wanted to say I know this situation is weird." I looked up from my screen. "What situation?" "You know." He shifted his weight. "Mason told us you'd be rolling off the project soon, so I'm supposed to take over the technical documentation." There it was. Confirmation of what I'd already known. They were pushing me out completely. That night, I sat in my car in the parking garage long after everyone else had gone home. My hands gripped the steering wheel while tears I'd been holding back for weeks finally came. This wasn't oversight or office politics. This was a coordinated effort to erase me from my own work. Branford wanted the glory of a successful project without sharing credit. Mason wanted a promotion he hadn't earned. And I was just collateral damage in their ambition. I felt stupid for not seeing it earlier, for trusting that hard work and talent would be enough, for believing the company I'd given 8 years to would treat me fairly. The garage was empty and silent except for my ragged breathing. I let myself break down completely for exactly 10 minutes. Then I dried my face and pulled out my phone. Time to stop being a victim and start being strategic. Monday morning brought an unexpected development. An email appeared in my inbox from someone I didn't recognize. The address belonged to Kellington Financial Group, one of the major investors in Vanguard Tech. "Ms. Collins, I'm reaching out regarding the data management system currently in development. Our firm has a vested interest in this project's success, and we'd like to request a technical demonstration before the final board presentation. We understand you are the primary architect, and we'd prefer the demonstration come directly from you. Please let us know your availability." I read it 3 times. An investor was contacting me directly requesting a demo. This could change everything. Or it could get me fired immediately if I responded without authorization. I was still staring at the investor email when Branford appeared at my cubicle. No greeting, just straight to business. "Did you receive an email from Kellington Financial?" My stomach tightened. "Yes, about an hour ago. You are not to respond to it. All investor communication goes through me or Mason. They specifically asked for me to." "I don't care what they asked for," Branford interrupted. "You're not authorized to speak with investors. Forward the email to me immediately." He didn't wait for confirmation, just walked away. I sat frozen for a moment, then forwarded the email as instructed. But not before I saved a copy to my personal records with a timestamp and Branford's direct order documented in my notes. 20 minutes later, I received a response from Kellington's representative. "Ms. Collins, we've been informed by your CEO that you are no longer the primary contact for this project. However, we have concerns about this change given your documented role in the system's development. We will be attending the final board presentation and would like to see a live demonstration of the full system at that time. This is non-negotiable for our continued investment." They'd copied Branford on the email. I could almost hear him panicking from 3 floors up. A live demonstration meant the system had to actually work, and it had to be explained by someone who understood it completely. Mason couldn't do that. Trevor definitely couldn't. They needed me whether they wanted to admit it or not. That evening, I stayed late to run a routine check on the system. What I found made my blood run cold. Mason's team had made changes. Significant changes. They'd attempted to optimize the database queries but had broken the connection protocols in the process. The user authentication module was completely non-functional. If they tried to demonstrate this system to investors, it would fail spectacularly within the first 5 minutes. I sat back, my mind racing. I could fix it. I'd built this system from scratch. I knew every line of code, every connection, every dependency. But should I? If I fixed it now, they'd use it to push me out completely. If I didn't fix it, The entire project could collapse, taking my professional reputation with it. Then I noticed something else. The system required an administrative override key for certain functions, a security feature I'd built in during early development. The override key was generated based on a complex algorithm tied to the system's core framework. I'd never shared that algorithm with anyone. Mason's version of the system didn't have the key. Without it, they couldn't access critical administrative functions. They couldn't demonstrate full system capability. They couldn't show investors what the system was actually worth. And there was no way to generate a new key without understanding the core architecture completely. I sat in the dark office, staring at the screen, and smiled for the first time in weeks. They'd boxed themselves into a corner. The question was whether they'd realize it before the presentation. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in small humiliations. In meetings I was still technically allowed to attend. My comments were talked over or ignored completely. Mason would literally speak louder whenever I tried to contribute. Other colleagues who used to respect my expertise suddenly acted like I was invisible. During one technical review, I pointed out a critical flaw in the testing protocol. The room went silent. Then Branford said, "Let's stay focused on the agenda," and moved on like I hadn't spoken. The flaw would cause data corruption in specific use cases, but nobody wanted to hear it from me. Someone found a sticky note I'd left on a conference room whiteboard with a solution to a problem the team had been struggling with. Mason erased my note and presented the same solution 5 minutes later as his own idea. Everyone congratulated him. My desk moved again. This time to a hallway alcove next to the supply closet. Temporary, Valerie from HR assured me. Just while we reconfigure the floor plan. But Mason's office, my old office, received new furniture and a fresh coat of paint. Nothing about this was temporary. They were systematically dismantling my professional presence, making me so uncomfortable that I'd quit voluntarily. That way they wouldn't have to fire me and risk legal issues. I endured it all with calm professionalism. I said good morning to people who ignored me. I attended meetings where I was treated like furniture. I submitted my work on time and kept detailed records of every interaction, because I knew something they didn't. The final presentation was in 6 days, and their system still didn't work. I spent my evenings organizing what I'd started calling my compliance folder. It was methodical documentation of everything wrong with how Vanguard had handled this project. Unauthorized file access, recorded with timestamps and user credentials. Email chains showing Branford's instructions to exclude me from key meetings. Calendar screenshots proving they'd cancelled my meetings without cause. Performance reviews from the past 3 years, all excellent, proving they had no legitimate reason to demote me. Copyright registration for my framework, establishing my ownership of the core architecture. And most damning, technical logs showing that Mason's modifications had broken the system, along with documentation that I'd reported these issues and been ignored. I organized everything chronologically, cross-referenced by topic, and created a summary document that laid out the timeline clearly. Any reasonable person reading this folder would see exactly what had happened. Then I learned something that made all my preparation even more critical. Through a colleague who still talked to me occasionally, I discovered there was a board review scheduled for Friday, the day before the final investor presentation. Branford and Mason were going to preview the project for the board of directors to ensure everything was ready. And my name wasn't anywhere on the meeting invite. They were going to present my system to the board without me in the room. That's when I knew they weren't just trying to minimize my role. They were trying to erase me from the project's history entirely. The morning of the board preview, I received an email from Kellington Financial's assistant. It was marked as accidentally sent to me instead of Branford, though I suspected it wasn't an accident at all. We remain concerned about the change in project leadership, especially given Ms. Collins' documented role as the original architect. The technical specifications we reviewed were clearly her work, and we're troubled by the sudden shift in attribution. For the final presentation, we're requesting full version logs for the system, showing the development timeline and all contributors. We need to verify the integrity of the leadership claims being made. They'd copied 3 other investors on the message. I forwarded it to my personal email and added it to my compliance folder. Then I waited. Within an hour, Branford called me. Not an email this time, an actual phone call. "Meredith, we need to have a conversation." His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. I walked to his office, my expression carefully neutral. He didn't invite me to sit. "The investors are asking questions about your role in the project. I need to know if you've been communicating with them behind my back." "You ordered me not to contact investors," I reminded him. "I've followed that instruction." "Then why are they asking for documentation that shows your contributions?" "Maybe because I built the system and they can see that in the technical specifications." My tone was mild, but I let a hint of challenge slip through. His jaw clenched. "Your attitude lately has been problematic." "My attitude has been professional despite being moved to a hallway, excluded from my own project, and watching someone else take credit for my work." The words came out calm and factual. "This conversation is over. But let me be clear about something, Meredith. After the final presentation, we'll be transitioning you out of this project entirely. Your services will no longer be required." There it was. The threat made explicit. I nodded once and left his office. The board preview happened without me, but I heard about it through the grapevine. Apparently it went well. Branford and Mason presented smoothly. The board asked questions, and Mason answered them with enough confidence to satisfy everyone. No technical demonstration was required, just slides and explanations. But I knew something they didn't. The board preview was just talk. The investor presentation would require a live demonstration of the actual system. And that system, in its current state, was fundamentally broken. That night, I received another call from Branford. "The board loved the preview," he said. His tone almost friendly now that he thought he'd won. "But the investors are insisting on a live demo tomorrow. I need you to make sure the system is fully functional." So now he needed me. Now that the performance actually mattered. "The system has issues that I reported 2 weeks ago," I said. "Issues that were ignored when I brought them up in the technical review. Can you fix them?" "The issues stem from modifications made by Mason's team. I'd need full administrative access and at least 12 hours of uninterrupted work." I heard him breathe sharply. "Fine. Whatever you need. Just make it work." "I'll need that authorization in writing," I said. Long pause. Then reluctantly, "I'll send an email." The email arrived 10 minutes later, granting me full system access and authorization to make any necessary modifications. I saved it immediately. Then I opened my laptop and stared at the broken code Mason's team had created. Could fix this. But I wasn't going to. Late that night, unable to sleep, I drove back to the office. The building was dark except for security lights and a few windows where people worked late. One of those windows was conference room A. I took the elevator up, walking quietly past empty cubicles. Through the glass wall of conference room A, I saw Mason and 3 members of his team. They were practicing. Mason stood at the front with a laptop connected to the projector, running through presentation slides. But every few minutes they'd stop and argue about something. I moved closer, staying in the shadows. They were trying to prepare for the live demonstration. Mason clicked through to the system interface, and immediately, an error message appeared. Database connection failed. One of his team members, a developer named Kyle, shook his head. "That's the authentication module. It's been broken since we modified the login protocols. Can you fix it before tomorrow?" Mason asked. "Not without access to the core framework. That's all locked behind Meredith's override key." Mason swore loudly. "What about using the admin backdoor?" "There is no backdoor. She built the security too well." I almost laughed. They tried to steal my work and were now trapped by their own theft. The system I'd created was secure, elegant, and completely dependent on architecture they didn't understand. They could present slides all day, but the moment they tried to demonstrate actual functionality, everything would collapse. I watched them for another few minutes as they grew increasingly frustrated. Then I went home and slept better than I had in weeks. Presentation day arrived with unseasonable rain hammering against the windows. I dressed carefully in my best suit, professional but not trying too hard. I arrived early and went to my hallway alcove desk, checking email and acting like this was any other day. Mason found me there at 8:30. His expression was smug, but I saw tension around his eyes. "Big day," he said, leaning against the wall. "Try not to look bitter during the presentation. It's unprofessional." I met his gaze steadily. "I'm never unprofessional. Just remember, you're there to support the team, not to speak unless someone asks you a direct technical question. And even then, keep it brief." "Understood." He started to walk away, then turned back. "You know, Meredith, you could have been part of this success. But you never learned how to play the game." After he left, I pulled out my phone and opened the folder with all my documentation. Everything was ready. At 9 o'clock, we gathered in the main conference room. The board of directors sat on one side of the long table. 4 investors, including representatives from Kellington Financial, sat on the other side. Branford and Mason stood at the front near the projector screen. I sat in the back corner, notebook open, looking exactly like what they'd reduced me to, a note-taker. Branford began with opening remarks about innovation and market opportunity. Then Mason took over, clicking through slides that showed my work while explaining it like he'd created everything himself. 10 minutes into the presentation, Mason connected his laptop to the system for the live demonstration. The screen loaded, then froze. An error message appeared in red text. System authentication failed. Contact administrator. The room went very quiet. Mason clicked frantically, trying to recover. The error persisted. He looked at Kyle, who was sitting near the front. Kyle shook his head slightly, helpless. Branford's face reddened. "Technical difficulties. Just give us a moment." One of the investors, a sharp-eyed woman from Kellington Financial, spoke up. "Before you continue, I have a question." The room shifted focus to her. "I've reviewed the technical documentation for this project extensively. It's impressive work. But I need clarification on something." She looked directly at Mason. "Who actually owns the system framework?" Silence swept through the room like a physical force. Mason opened his mouth, then closed it. Branford's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle twitch. "The system was developed by our team," Branford said carefully. "But specifically," the investor pressed, "who created the core architecture? The foundational design that everything else builds on?" More silence. I could feel people's eyes starting to drift toward me in the back corner. Another investor, an older man with silver hair, pulled out a folder. "We received documentation yesterday showing that the framework is registered under a copyright belonging to Meredith Collins, not Vanguard Tech. Can you explain that discrepancy?" Branford's face went pale. Mason looked like he'd been struck. And for the first time in months I stood up. "May I address the board?" I asked, my voice calm and professional. Patricia, the board member who'd been at the initial presentation, gestured toward the front of the room. "Please do." I walked forward carrying my folder. Every eye in the room followed me. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "My name is Meredith Collins. 16 months ago, I was asked to develop a comprehensive data management system for a major client. I accepted and spent the next 14 months building it from scratch. I placed my first document on the table where everyone could see. It was the original email from Branford, assigning me as project lead. This is the official assignment. You'll note the date, my title as Senior Systems Architect, and Branford's explicit statement that I would be heading this project independently. Next document. These are my development logs showing every major decision, every iteration, every breakthrough. They're time-stamped and include technical details that only the actual architect would know. I walked them through it methodically. Email exchanges where I answered complex technical questions. Meeting notes where I presented solutions to problems. Progress reports I'd submitted weekly for over a year. And finally, the copyright registration. I developed the core framework independently, on my own time using my own equipment. I have notebooks, sketches, and email timestamps proving the original concept existed before Vanguard's involvement. I looked at Mason, then at Branford. What you've been presenting today is my work. Every algorithm, every interface design, every line of code. Mason couldn't explain how the system works because he didn't build it. He's been taking credit for something he doesn't understand. Patricia leaned forward. Branford, were you aware of this copyright registration? He faltered. This is the first I'm hearing of it. That's interesting, I said quietly, because I reported unauthorized access to my files 2 months ago. Access that came from Mason's credentials at unusual hours. The board erupted into conversation. Patricia held up her hand for silence. Let me understand this clearly. Ms. Collins was the original architect and project lead, but somehow Mr. Mason is now listed as lead architect. How did that transition occur? Branford tried to recover. Mason took on expanded responsibilities as the project evolved. Without documentation, Patricia interrupted. Without any formal change in project leadership. That's not protocol. He turned to Mason. Can you explain the technical failure we just witnessed? Mason's face was flushed. There's a system error that. The error occurred because you don't have the administrative override key, I said calmly. A security feature I built into the core architecture. Without understanding how that system works, you can't generate a new key. The Kellington investor spoke again. So you're telling us that the person presenting this project can't actually operate the system? It appears that way, I confirmed. Branford jumped in desperately. This is a misunderstanding. Mason has been working closely with the development team. Working closely with them or taking credit for their work. Patricia's voice was ice. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you pushed out your lead architect and tried to replace her with someone who can't even answer basic questions. She opened her own folder. I've also been reviewing personnel records. Miss Collins was moved from her office to a cubicle, then to a hallway. Her meetings were cancelled without explanation. Her name was removed from project documentation. This isn't standard management. This is systematic erasure. Branford tried to blame Mason. Mason tried to blame IT. The board members' expressions grew colder with each excuse. Patricia stood, and the room fell silent. I'm calling for an immediate internal review of this project, including all personnel decisions, file access logs, and communication records. She looked directly at me. Ms. Collins, I'll need you to participate in this review. Please make yourself available. Of course, I replied. As for you, Patricia said, turning to Branford and Mason, I want written explanations on my desk by tomorrow morning detailing your roles in this situation. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Board members huddled together speaking in low, angry voices. Investors gathered around me. Asking technical questions I answered easily and completely. Mason stood frozen near the front of the room. His career crumbling in real time. 2 days later, Human Resources called me in. But this time it wasn't Valerie. It was the Chief Operating Officer, a woman named Helen who rarely involved herself in individual cases. Ms. Collins, our review has uncovered significant issues, she said. Unauthorized file access, falsified project documentation, and deliberate exclusion from meetings you should have attended. She slid a folder across the desk. We found 37 instances of files accessed using Mason's credentials during hours when building security shows he wasn't in the office. Someone was using his account to copy your work. He nodded. I already knew all this. Mason has been terminated, Helen continued. His employment ended this morning. Felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Just empty acknowledgement. And Branford. Under investigation. He's been removed from active duties pending the board's final decision. Pause. I owe you an apology. Vanguard Tech failed you. Yes, I agreed. You did. Which is why the board would like to speak with you about a different kind of future here. The board meeting the next day was nothing like the presentation had been. This time I sat at the table as an equal. Patricia led the discussion. Ms. Collins, we've completed our preliminary review. The evidence is clear. You are the creator of this system, and you were systematically pushed out by management who wanted to take credit for your work. Pause. Branford has been removed from his position as CEO, effective immediately. The board is restructuring leadership. I waited, unsure where this was heading. We'd like to offer you a position as Director of Systems Architecture, reporting directly to the board rather than through traditional management channels. She pushed a folder across the table. This would include a significant salary increase, equity in the company, and full control over all technical projects moving forward. I opened the folder. The numbers were substantial. More than double my previous salary, plus benefits I'd never had access to before. There's one condition, Patricia added. We need you to save this project. The client is still waiting, and without you, we have nothing to deliver. I looked at the offer for a long moment. Everything I'd worked for, finally recognized. But recognition that came only after I'd been pushed to the breaking point. I need 48 hours to consider this, I said. Patricia nodded. Of course. Take the time you need. That evening my phone rang. It was Kellington Financial's lead investor. Ms. Collins, I wanted to reach out personally. Your presentation was impressive, and not just technically. Thank you, I replied cautiously. My firm is considering several investment opportunities in the tech sector. We'd be very interested in discussing opportunities with you, whether at Vanguard or elsewhere. I spent 2 days thinking about what I really wanted. Vanguard was offering everything I'd asked for originally. Recognition, respect, compensation, control. But they were offering it only because they'd been caught. Because investors had forced their hand. Not because they valued me but because they needed me. On the third day, I walked into Patricia's office and handed back the unsigned offer. I appreciate this, but I'm declining. Her eyes widened. May I ask why? Because respect that comes only after public humiliation isn't really respect. It's damage control. Understood. I'm giving my resignation, effective in 2 weeks. That gives you time to find someone else to complete the project. Meredith, please reconsider. We're committed to changing the culture here. Then change it for the next woman who builds something remarkable. Make sure she doesn't have to fight for credit the way I did. I walked out of Vanguard Tech 3 weeks later, taking nothing but my personal belongings and the knowledge of what I was worth. Mason never worked in the industry again. Branford took a position at a much smaller firm with a much smaller title. And me. Kellington Financial backed my new consulting firm. Within 6 months, I had 4 major clients and a team of developers who I made sure received credit for every single thing they built. The system Vanguard had tried to steal. I rebuilt it, better than before, for a client who valued innovation. My name was on every patent, every presentation, every success. Because real revenge isn't destroying the people who wronged you. It's building something so successful that their betrayal becomes just a footnote in your much larger story.